All right, hey everybody, good morning. Good to see you guys there. Welcome back. It's April 24th. This is Friday. So this is our morning meeting for Intro to Philosophy there at Chapman and the 9 to 9:50 class. Hope you guys are doing well. Good to see you. Whoever's going to be arriving to this live stream at whatever time, whether it's live or replay. So yeah, we just have another important meeting. We're going to go over philosophy of mind topics a little bit more. We have to, we're going to finish up with Descartes and then start talking about the physicalists, the monist side of the whole debate. So that's the plan for today. And then you guys will be on to your weekend. But we'll get in this lecture. So about 5 minutes from now, that's class time. We'll just launch right into these notes. Okay. Hey guys. My phone here is a backup. Good morning. Hey Bella. Anybody else, feel free to say hello, drop a comment. Hey Marissa, nice to see you too. All right, just a few more minutes. So yeah, anybody who's considering the philosophy of mind topic for your essay, these are definitely important lectures for that. So you're always encouraged to attend as much as possible, but of course, given the fact that you have some work that you have to turn in, it's probably even more important at this little period of time. So just make sure to keep reliably coming to these meetings. I mean, if you can get 20 people to go to a classroom, I figure it shouldn't be that hard for people to just log in from their computers wherever they're at. Hey, Emily, nice to see you. Hey, Eric. Yeah, because attendance numbers, they kind of go up and down. Just be honest with you guys don't attend as much as the next hour does, but the core group that I always see here with the people that I see reliably in the chat, I know you guys are always here. Would be awesome if everyone would do the same. But hey, I guess that's one of the benefits of having a YouTube live stream. You can always just watch it later if you want. But the interaction is really good. I think it is a little early too, right? Yeah, I know. That's the other thing. 9 a.m. class. I had 8 a.m. classes at Chapman before, and those are even harder for people to get up and get out. But I mean, but at the same time, Eric, don't you think the excuse is not as great now that we're all under coronavirus lockdown? I mean, all you got to really do is get out of bed and just turn on the computer. Isn't that true? So in my mind, I don't know how much I can really relate, but see me, I was obsessive about being everywhere at all times. I never missed any meetings, even though I didn't have to go. I just found it interesting. It's true, there's time differences. That's right. We got people all over the world, all over the country now. So fair enough, fair point. I'm just, I'm a professor, right? What am I supposed to say to my students? Don't come to class, just maybe sleep through it. So I got to try and emphasize and motivate you guys a little bit to try and stimulate your attendance. I'm not a stickler for it, but at the same time, I like to see people in the meeting, and it's just something to say. But it doesn't really apply to you if you're watching this right now, clearly. So. Okay. All right, so we're getting really close to 9. Good morning, everybody. Good to see you guys again. And today our meeting is dedicated to trying to wrap up Descartes and his argument for dualism. We actually did cover the whole argument, but there's a couple of little extra comments that he made after that I kind of wanted to talk about. And then we will start talking about the physicalist side of the whole debate. What do monists say to try and defend their position? Okay, so just a little bit of review from last lecture and the past couple meetings. We're now talking about the philosophy of mind, another subject in philosophy, and it's all about consciousness, perception, thought. Essentially, the question is, what's the nature of consciousness? Is it just something physical, or is it something that is other than the physical somehow? And one of the major debated areas is between monism and dualism. So monists are those that say everything in the whole universe is made out of just one kind of substance. Dualists are people that say, no, there's two different types of substances. And what are the two possible substances? Okay, so there's physical matter on the one hand. That's anything that's extended in space. So essentially, at the basic level, it's atoms. And then there's the mind. And the mind is thought of as something that lacks extension, and it's consciousness. So it's just a thinking thing, but it has no material substance or extension in space. Okay, now if you're a monist, there are the two branches. There's physicalism and then there's idealism. We're really not too concerned with idealism for the most part, but physicalists are the ones that say everything is made out of matter, even us and our consciousness is just made out of matter. Idealists say everything's made out of ideas, but we're really more looking at physicalism as opposed to dualism. Hey, Hugh. So dualism says there's both substances, that there's two substances that make up the whole universe and everything in it, and one of them is matter and the other is mind. Now, Descartes is one that is a dualist, so he's defending the dualist position. And we kind of examined his argument. So I'm just going to run through it quickly because we've spent some decent time going over it in the previous meetings, just so we can all kind of keep it in the mind. That argument says, okay, you can doubt a lot of things based on the method of doubt that was introduced earlier in the book. You can doubt everything you perceive with your senses. You can even doubt mathematical statements that seem very obvious. So one thing that can't be doubted, though, is that you exist simply because you're thinking. So at the very least, you're a mind which is thinking, even if the body that you perceive is somehow not real. Okay, well, in the mind that you have, there are ideas. One of the ideas is very unique because it's the idea of God. He says that idea is special because it's the one and only idea in your mind of something that's an infinite being. The idea of everything else except for God is the idea of something finite or limited, but the idea of God is something unlimited and infinite. So he says, where could that idea have come from? It must have come from a source that has infinite reality, because an infinite idea has to come from some infinite thing. Therefore, the cause of the idea is an infinite being, which is God. So God really exists. Why? Because we have an idea of him, and there's no other way we could have possibly had that idea. Okay, so God, then he says, is known to be, among other things, perfectly good. And since he's perfectly good, he's not a deceiver. Since he's not a deceiver, that means that when you have clear and distinct perceptions, they would have to be true, because otherwise God would be a deceiver, but he's not. So clear and distinct perceptions must be true. Okay, so then from there, one of the clear and distinct perceptions is this point that if two things could be clearly understood as existing separately in the mind, then the same two things are actually separate in reality. Whether it's me and these glasses that I'm wearing, or anything else that happens to have a connection with something else, but it could be existing apart. If you can imagine the two things existing separately, then it is possible for them to actually be separate, and therefore they're not essential to one another for their existence. Okay, and then finally we get to the end. So he also then claims, as noted earlier, that it's possible to clearly conceive of your mind existing separately from your body. And since you can clearly conceive of that, the two things really must be separate, because God wouldn't allow you to see something that clearly and distinctly and have it be false. Otherwise, he'd be a deceiver. So therefore, the mind and body are distinct. There's two different substances, not just one. And that then is just the argument for dualism. Now, there are like a couple of other minor clear and distinct perceptions that he adds to this discussion afterward, because he wants to tell the reader that it's not just the knowledge that the mind and the body are two separate things that we can now say we know for sure, based on the premise that God is good and wouldn't allow us to be deceived about things that are clear and distinct. So I'm just going to put on the table here two other clear and distinct perceptions that the author does talk about. So other clear and distinct perceptions. Okay, so there's really two other ones that are important to the author here. One is the notion that the external world, it really does exist. So the external world exists. And then also that you have a body, so that I have a body. That's also, he says, a clear and distinct perception. Okay, so about the external world existing. He gives a couple of reasons why this seems to us to be so clear and distinct. Now remember, in the beginning of the meditations, Descartes was the guy saying, who knows if the external world exists? Is it a dream? I don't know, maybe it is, so that's something maybe you could doubt. But now, at the sixth meditation, close to the end of the book, he says, actually, this is something clear and distinct, which now we can claim as true, given the existence of God, who's perfectly good and not a deceiver. So, okay, I know all of you guys definitely believe the external world exists. It would be strange if you thought that right now you actually were dreaming. But what would you say is the reason that that's so clear? What makes it seem clear to us that the world around you is not just some dream you're having, but is actually real and it exists outside of your mind? What is there about this experience of you in this world that makes it seem pretty obvious that the world around you is not just an illusion, or it's not something created by your own imagination or mind? Why would that seem so obvious? Why is it obvious? He says it is actually now. But what would you think of it could be possibly a reason that you could give for that? You know, like what makes you sure that it's not just a dream that you're having, but that the outside world around you does independently exist beyond your mind? Why does that seem so clear? Do you think about that, or could you give me a thought about that? Look around you. How do you know all that stuff is real? What makes you say or believe that it really is real? Why? What could be a good piece of reasoning or evidence that the external world is actually existing? Well, you say you can see it. That's not really deep enough, though, guys, because you'd still see the hologram illusion that you're living in if it was a dream, right? When you're in a dream, you can see the stuff in the dream. So maybe try again. You say your senses, but Matthew, the whole point is your senses themselves could be found within a dream. So we're going to have to reach for something else. You're talking about connected to memories, Marissa. That's actually good, and we will go over that. In fact, that is one of the reasons. So I want to mention that and a couple of the other bases that he gives. So here's one thing he says. Think about this, guys, if you could, all right? I know it's a tough question. It's a question you've probably never been asked because, you're like, of course it exists. But this is philosophy. You got to think about why. How's that clear? All right, so for example, if this world that you're existing within was just a dream and it was created by you, the dreamer, then what kind of experiences do you think you would have? If the external reality was just a figment of your imagination, then what kind of life do you think you'd be living if the world around you was just under your own control or was a byproduct of your thoughts? Don't you think that if you kind of created the world through your own dreaming, that it would have what kind of features, you think? If this life you're living was simply a big illusion and you're the dreamer dreaming it, then what kind of experiences do you think you would supply yourself with in that case? What do you think? Just a question. You understand the question, right? Like, if the world was a dream that you're having right now, then what kind of dream do you think you would dream if it was your dream and you could have whatever dream you wanted? What kind of life do you think that would amount to? If it's not actually real around you and just a big sort of dream or whatever, what kind of experiences do you think you'd have? Better ones? Okay, good. Yeah, that's kind of what we're going for here. I'm not saying your life's not good. Probably it's very good, right? You guys seem happy and healthy group, of course. But, the thing is, you'd probably just have all the favorable experiences, right? You'd never have any unfavorable experiences, because why would you want to have them if you could simply control the dream? So that's one point he makes here. One reason that this is so clear and distinct. So clear and distinct because, one reason, I cannot only perceive that which is favorable. So there's kind of two sides to that. You can't make yourself only have favorable perceptions, nor can you just eliminate from reality the unfavorable perceptions, right? So like take this coronavirus thing, which is not good at all. If the world was a dream you're having, then you probably could just will it out of existence. You could be like, okay, I don't want that thing to exist. And then since you're the sort of author of reality in that case, it would stop existing. Or maybe it would never exist in the first place. If you, let's say, were dreaming this life, then where would you find your keys if you ever lost them? I mean, in a way, you probably wouldn't lose them in the first place because it's annoying to have to look for a lost item. But if the world was just a dream and didn't have independent reality, then you'd probably just find it in your pocket or in the first place that you looked, right? So that's one thing. You cannot control the perceptions of what happens in reality, as you would expect if it didn't independently exist. So when something negative happens, if this world was just a dream, you probably wouldn't have had those negative experiences. Another point that makes this clear and distinct is that I cannot control what I perceive. So that's point 2. I cannot control what I perceive. So it's kind of related to the first point, but just in a more general sense. For example, right now, wherever you're at watching this, I would like you to just cast your gaze to an open area of your room or whatever, and I want you to just start to see and perceive an alligator right there. Can you do that? Can you make yourself have a visual perception right now of an alligator? And the answer is no, I hope. What you can do is like think of an alligator in the mind's eye, but you can't make one like somehow appear in front of you as though it was actually in the same room with you. Doesn't that seem to indicate that the world itself doesn't just have arbitrary contents that could be shifted around by the mind, but that it exists outside of you independently? Because if it didn't, then you'd have a locus of control over the nature of the things that are perceived. But try as hard as you want, and you can't perceive something that's not actually there in space. So that gives another good, clear reason that the world outside of your mind is actually real and not just a big illusion. And then there's one additional reason, and this gets to your suggestion there, Marissa. So I'm going to erase these two and put up the third little clear and distinct basis for the thought that the external world exists. Okay, so the third one is this. That memories are less vivid than original perception. So it says there, memories are less vivid than original perceptions are. Okay, so let's think quickly about an interesting fact concerning memory as opposed to when you originally had the experience. Okay, so compare this. Right now, you're watching this lecture live. So this is happening in the present. It's not a memory, at least not yet, because it's happening currently. But if you think, for example, back to, I don't know, the first day that we had the class, back when we were at Chapman in whatever it was, Beckman Hall 201 or something, 206, I can't remember, but we were in that building and in that room. Now, do you have the memory? Can you think of that memory? I'm sure you probably can. But what's clearer in terms of how vivid and distinct it is? This present perception or the memory that you have of a past meeting? I would imagine, and it's probably just obvious to everybody, that the current perception you're having is much more vivid than memories of the things that happened before, even if they're closer to the present moment. So think of our Wednesday meeting on the live stream. Isn't it less vivid thinking back to my statements and lecture than this is what you're watching right now? Okay, and that's just generally the case. When you have a present perception, it's happening live, it's very clear and vivid. When you think back to memories, it's kind of a little faded and washed out since it's from the past. Now, what could explain that drop-off in clarity from the original experience to the later memorial recollection of it? It seems the only real explanation for that is that it's so clear and vivid in the moment because that's when you're actually surrounded by the external objects that you're perceiving with your perceptual system. Then later on, when you try to represent the perceived experience in the mind's eye, you're no longer in the presence of those objects anymore, okay? So like For example, back when we were in Chapman and we were having a live meeting, like on, let's say, one of our early class periods, at that time, you're surrounded by the other students in the room and the classroom and me, the professor, and the tables and chairs and stuff that's in the room. At that time, you're seeing the objects that are in your external environment, and so it's very clear. Now, when I'm asking you to try and remember that, those objects and people are no longer in your immediate environment, so you cannot perceive them as clearly as you could when you're actually with the things. Now, if everything in the whole world around you was just an illusion or dream, then why should there be a difference between the clarity of the original perception and the later recall of it? Because under that case, both of them would just be mental figments. So there shouldn't be any loss of vividness from the original imagination of a scene and the later memory of it. So the loss of clarity and vividness from the original perception to the later memory is yet further basis to assess that the external world really does exist. So now hopefully we can see one interesting thing about Descartes, that by the time his book ends, he ultimately does return back to the everyday common sense position that the external world really does exist. But he's willing to doubt it for a moment there with a method of doubt until he could secure this proof, which he thinks is grounded by the guarantee that clear and distinct perceptions must be true since God's not a deceiver. Okay, and then there's this last thing here, that you have a body. So why is that so clear and distinct, that you have a body, or that stated in the first person, I have a body? This is clear and distinct for certain reasons that we'll talk about. So, okay, I'm sure you believe that you do have a body. I mean, just take a look, it seems like it's right there with you. But what is a reason, if you could possibly think of one, why that seems to be clear? Like, what makes it obvious to you that you have that body, that it's your body? Think about that. What's making it so straightforwardly clear that the body that you think you have, you actually do have? And what makes you think that it's yours, that it belongs to you? What could be a reason for that? Think about that one, if you can give me something. What's a basis to think that the body you appear to have actually is yours and it belongs to you? Why think you have one? Okay, good, Eric. That's exactly one point. Because you can control it, right? You can control that body, yours, but you can't, through your mind, control the operations or activities of any other body. So that would give a real good reason to think that it's actually yours because you possess control over it. Okay, so I'll put that up here, and that's very good. Because I can control the actions of this body with my mind, but not others. Okay, so an obvious fact about your body is that you have control over it, right? So, like for me right now, I'm going to clap my hands. Watch, I did it. And I therefore had control over my hands, right? I thought to myself, let's do this to demonstrate something to the students, and then I made it happen just by making the muscles move. But if I think right now, these students watching this, have them clap their hands, and I'm thinking clap their hands. It's not like you will do that, right? So I can control my body, but I cannot directly control what you're going to do with yours. And that's the same vice versa. You have control over the movements and operations of your own body, but not mine. So that gives a good reason to think that it's actually yours because you have a locus of control over it. Good. Another thing that he says is this. So you can control the actions of this body, but not others. Furthermore, you experience sensations when a stimuli is applied to your body, but not to others. Okay, so I feel sensations when this body is given a stimulus, but not others. Okay, so if I, for example, pinch my arm right now, ouch, like I can feel a slight amount of pain there. But you don't feel the pain. You might empathize with me. You might say, like, metaphorically, I really feel for you. I feel your pain, but you don't literally feel the same experience, right? So, and it's vice versa. If pain or pleasure, heat or ice or anything is applied to your body, then you'll have the experience of it, but not another body that's not being affected in the same way. So the fact that sensations arise for you when stimuli is applied to that body which you take to be yours is another powerful reason to think of it as yours, because you're the only one that can feel the things that happen to it, basically. Okay, and then a third reason that is so clear and distinct is basically, I think, quite straightforward, and it's just that you can't remove yourself from this body, but you can remove yourself from any other body. So. Unlike all other bodies. So another fact about your own body is that you're bounded up with it. You're locked into it. You can't go away from it. You can, of course, be away from any other physical body in this universe, right? So the other people, you can remove yourself from them. This table that I'm next to, if I really wanted to, I could get far away from it. A city, a building, a piece of clothing, a land formation, whatever it is, if I really wanted to and had the means, I could remove myself from that object. But I can't remove myself from this body. We've talked about social distancing, right? We're all doing that. And so in a way, we're all removing ourselves from other human bodies to some extent. But you can't socially distance from yourself, right? You can't just get up and leave the body behind as you go off and do other things. So that's another reason to think that it's your body, because you're tied to it, you're connected to it, and you seem to be joined to it. Now, how does that square with his earlier commentary, though, that the mind and the body can be distinguished? Well, okay, God could do that for you, but you yourself, unless your life ended somehow, can't affect the separation of mind and body. So that's something to be done by God, basically, but it's conceivable. It's just that it's something that's not so easy to achieve while you're still living, of course. Okay, so that was everything I wanted to tell you guys about Descartes. There's actually a little more in his sixth meditation. He talks about how, well, what if you have phantom limb pain and you feel like you have a pain in a limb, but it's not even there? Is that God deceiving you? And he doesn't think so, because he believes that we can have the means to discover that that's a misfiring of the typical operation of the nervous system. But that's a little bit more detail than I think we had time for. So we're moving on from our Descartes now. And we've fully covered his argument for dualism, together with a couple of additional comments he makes after that, now that he believes he's established the principle that a clear and distinct perception has to be true. So at the end of the day, in Descartes' book, not only do we think that the mind and the body are distinct because God is good and exists and he's not a deceiver, but also the external world exists. The things that you appear to perceive, really, they're there. And you do have a body. So it's kind of coming back to common sense at the tail end there. Yeah. All right, so good. Yeah, I'm just seeing if there's anything left over that I did want to mention at the tail end, but I think that's about it. All right, then, guys. So, or actually, here, I'll read this one quote from him, and then we're really done. He says, trying to find here. It's going to lack context without me going over the whole thing about the nervous system. So we're good on Descartes. Now then, let's move ahead to the Daniel Stoljar. Okay, so next up for us is this guy, Daniel Stoljar. Daniel Stoljar is a physicalist philosopher. So he takes the opposite perspective from Descartes here. His basic argument is that physicalism is true, and he both wants to try and explain what physicalism means, how to interpret it, and then to give some arguments that it is true. So Daniel Stoljar, let's see, I'm not sure when he was born because it's not listed here in the book because he's still living and he's not exactly the oldest philosopher. So let's see if I can get that on the Google here. Okay, yeah, he's born in 1967. Yeah. Physicalism by Daniel Stoljar, 2005. So he starts off just by saying, okay, the definition of physicalism is the basic principle that everything is physical. So that's the definition of it. As he says it, it's a simple definition. Everything is physical. So it's a thesis about what everything in the whole universe is made out of. It says that this universe and everything in it is just a physical place. It's filled with physical objects, and there's nothing other than physical things. Everything's physical. Me and you are physical, and our consciousness. Now, according to physicalism, as he states it, there are definitely other fields of study besides physics. Some people study history, some people study literature, some people study philosophy. But what he says is that despite the fact that there are these different disciplines in the academy, what they ultimately all boil down to in a big picture sense is physics. Everything is more or less a branch of physics. Because say, for example, what is a historical time period that a historian might study? Like, let's talk about American Revolution or World War II or something. What is an event like that according to a physicalist? It's just the playing out of atoms in the void of space, collected in various ways, like into human organisms, and then they lead to the events which we record in history. What is a poet beside a very complex collection of atoms grouped together to form the life form that generates the poetic piece? So basically, according to physicalists, everything is physical, and even those fields of investigation and study that don't immediately appear to be having anything to do with physics are ultimately, in the big picture, indirectly related to physics. So his goal, after just saying what physicalism is to try and give us an understanding of what it means to say that everything is physical. What does it mean to say that everything is physical? So he gives us two big questions that he thinks we need to sort of grapple with to fully comprehend and then justify the position of physicalism. So here's two questions that he thinks we should answer, or at least try to answer. One he calls the interpretation question. And then the other, the truth question. So first, this interpretation question is simply the question, what does it mean to say that everything is physical? What does that statement really mean? Physicalism says everything is physical, but what does that really mean? What does it mean to say that everything is physical? Okay, question number one. What does it mean to say that everything is physical? And then the truth question, is it true that everything is physical? So he says, these are the two big questions that anybody interested in this subject would want to try and pursue. First of all, getting a clear interpretation of what physicalism is saying, and that's the first question. What does it really mean then to say that everything is physical in more detail? And then also the second question, is it true? Once we have an understanding of what it means, we might wonder, well, is it true or not? Now these two questions are different questions, but they're logically related because to answer one of them, you have to kind of answer the other one first. Which of these two do you think you would have to answer first before you could really go on to answer the other one? They have a logical order. So you really have to tackle one of the two before you can approach the second one. Which one do you think should go first in the order of investigation? Just wonder if you had a thought. If you consider it for a minute, I think the answer is not too tough. But which one would you think? Yeah, that's right. The interpretation question would come first, because if you don't know what the statement means, then you cannot evaluate whether it's true. If I told you, watch out because there's boggles all around Chapman University, you would not be able to tell me whether that's true or false unless you knew what the statement boggles was referring to. I'm just making that up. It's just nonsense. But the point is, in order to assess whether any statement is true, you have to at least have a working understanding of what the statement is claiming to say. So we have to deal with the interpretation question first. Therefore, we're going to try and figure it out. What does it mean to say that everything is physical? What does it mean to say that 100% of all things are physical things? To answer that question, it has kind of become customary to utilize the notion of what's called supervenience. So now I have to describe for you guys the idea of supervenience and supervenience physicalism. So we're going to launch into our interpretation question, try and find some answer to it, and I have to provide you that answer by means of the concept of supervenience. Okay, so we are now trying to learn about this idea, supervenience. So that is a philosophy word that you don't find pretty much anywhere else, maybe in some physics too. And I want to make sure that it's clear to you guys how to spell it, so I'm writing it in the chat here. If you write a paper on this topic, you're going to get spelling error in the word proofreading system of the computer, because it's not recognized in a lot of dictionaries. But it's a technical term that's used in philosophy, and it has precise meaning. So we want to kind of clarify that. This concept of supervenience is used to provide the answer to our question, what does it mean to say that everything is physical? So the idea of supervenience can best be understood through the example of a dot matrix picture. Okay, now dot matrix picture. This is an example of a picture that's actually formed out of a bunch of tiny little dots. If you look at printed images, like in a magazine or whatever, and you look at the picture under high magnification, like say a magnifying glass, what you see when you look up close is that it's actually formed out of a grid of ever so many tiny little dots. That's how we're able to quickly reproduce printed images that appear on a printed page. So, like say there's a newspaper with a headline and an image of, like, I don't know, the president's face on the cover of the newspaper, newspaper. What you have to generate that image is you digitize the image and assign coordinates to each point along a grid so that it can illuminate each point along the grid with a certain color. So the overall grid then just stamps down the image, and it can reproduce it perfectly over and over again as the assembly line process generates a bunch of those duplicated pictures. So you basically want right now to think of a grid-like structure where there's a bunch of individual little dots, and the dots in combination with each other form the larger image. In art, there's a technique of art that's called mosaic art. Maybe some of you have heard of that. So these digitized, or we could say dot matrix images, they kind of have a similarity in principle to a mosaic, because a mosaic is like, let's say, a bunch of tiny little tiles that form a bigger image when they're put together. Okay, is this making sense to you guys, the dot matrix image concept? Hopefully so. I'm trying my best to verbally explain it, but I'll also put a picture on the board to make it a bit clearer. Another example that you could think of, I guess, is that sometimes I've seen pictures formed out of a ton of little pictures. So when you zoom in, you see like there's a ton of little photos. When you take a step back, they somehow form this, I don't know, scene that has nothing to do with the individual photos at the atomic level. So basically a dot matrix image is a big picture made out of a bunch of little dots, okay? So for example, say that this is such a dot matrix image. Now my artistic skills are limited, right? So you're gonna have to try and supply a little of your own creativity to make sure that we see this thing. I don't know if it's the best picture of all time, right? But can anybody guess what I'm trying to sort of draw there? Let's see if you tell me. What's that picture? Maybe it's not even something you can interpret, but I hope it is. Let me see. What do you think? What am I drawing in this image? That's not too philosophical. Just what does it look like? Okay, good. Yeah, it's like, ooh, mountain versus ocean. All right, guys. Well, I was trying to, I guess, go for the ocean waves at the beach, but I guess it is a little ambiguous. Let's just say that it's the ocean interpretation, which is kind of what I was going for, but really it doesn't matter much as long as it's an example. But yeah, let's pretend, if you might, that these are the waves of the ocean. This is the sun, you know, shining down, and there's some birds up there flying around and all that. They could have looked like mountain peaks, I understand, but let's just go with ocean, okay? So let's say this is a dot matrix image. Why did I create it out of a bunch of tiny little dots? Well, to try and simulate for you visually. No, it's fine. I mean, now that I looked at it, I realized that it kind of does maybe even look more like mountains, but we just have to work with the artist that we've got, which is me, and very limited. So yeah, back to this. Why are there a bunch of tiny little dots in a series? Because I'm trying to make it, you know, have the quality of a dot matrix image. In a real dot matrix image, these dots would be way too big. You know, they'd be tiny little pixels. You wouldn't see the individual dots separated as such. But anyway, little terminology now. In a dot matrix image like this, what we say is that all the large-scale features of the image supervene on the individual dots being placed in that order. So terminology, there's what we call global features in such an image. And global features of the dot matrix image are just any large-scale features of the composite image. So global feature. It is just a big picture aspect or a large-scale of the composite or image, in this case, dot matrix. So global feature is just a big picture aspect of any such composite structure. So the global features are things that are built out of the atomic elements. So what do you think, for example, could be a global feature of this scene that you see on the board? And I'll just kind of really make it hopefully easy to say. A global feature is not one of the dots. It's something that is formed by many of the dots combining. So it's one of the things that you'll see when you take a step back and look at the whole image, but it's not something you'd see under close magnification where you're just looking at dot, dot, dot. So what would you say is, for example, a global feature of this image here? Okay, good, the sun. The entire picture, I guess you could say, Eric, but that's a little bit more general than I was looking for. I was thinking of, like, you know, elements of the image that are formed from the dots, but that maybe aren't the whole thing. Nonetheless, the entire picture also works. So yes, the ocean, the bird, waves. Okay, exactly, guys, good job. So a global feature is just something that is a product of the elements that form the matrix. Now, to give you a second way of thinking about these dot matrix images that maybe you can relate to, because I know a lot of us today don't necessarily look at images on the printed page as much as maybe past. But what we often do, and what we're doing right now, for example, is look at things on a screen, the digital screen. Now, if you do look at like a computer monitor, television screen, or telephone, whatever, smartphone, and you look at that screen under high magnification, you're also going to actually see a lot of little bits, but they're not dots, or they're not called dots of ink. What would you say are the elements that form the grid, as it were, of your digital viewing devices? There's a word for that too, and they're definitely there. You're even looking at them right now, maybe without thinking so much about it, but say your telephone or laptop, or yes, pixels is what I'm going for. So what is a pixel? Well, a pixel is like a little tricolored bit that is part of the structure of your digital viewing device. So how is it, for example, that different devices can all display like the same exact image? Well, basically, instructions are given from the hardware of the device to illuminate certain of the pixels with certain shades of color. And given those instructions, any image can be projected onto the digital screen. And the exact same image can be reproduced on another screen, which has got equivalent resolution, right? So you can also think of our example of the dot matrix on the order of a pixelated image formed out of ever so many tiny little, in that case, not ink dots, but rather pixels arranged and lit up in a certain way, okay? Now, a global feature of such a system is one of the larger scale macroscopic elements of it, formed from the little pixels or bits. Now, what we're going to do next is just make sure you understand one thing. If you had got two side-by-side dot matrices like these, and they had the exact same identical arrangement of dots, or two digital viewing screens, which have got the exact same arrangement of pixels, then those two images would have what relationship to each other? So if I had another dot matrix over here, which was exactly identical in the ordering and placement of individual dots, then the second image would have to have all the same what? Follow me now, I'm talking about a comparison of two dot matrices. The first one has some features. The second one is identical in the individual placement of each pixel or dot. If that's the case, then the second image would have to be what? We're talking about having a second structured dot matrix with the exact same arrangement of individual dots. That second image would just be what in relation to the first? It would be a copy, exactly. It would be a carbon copy. So it would have exactly all the same global features. So that's an important point for us to recognize. If two dot matrices are the same at the atomic level, right? They have the same exact ordering of dots, then they have to be the same exact things at all higher levels of description too. Because what are the global features anyway? The global features are nothing other than the arrangement of dots that make them up. So an identically arranged dot matrix in terms of each dot would have to have exactly the same global features too. So if I could reproduce this in a second case with the same exact placement and ordering of those little dots that I drew, then would there also be a bird in the second image? Yes. Would there also be the sun in the second image? Yes. Why? Because by hypothesis, if the dots that form the second image are placed in the same array, then they're going to have the same exact larger scale features too. And that's exactly the same with the pixel digital screen thing. You know, if I have a screenshot of something and I share it to a friend or whatever through Messenger, then their device is going to have the exact same type of backlit illumination of pixels, and that's going to reproduce the image to the exact detail. All right? So basically, here's a principle. If two dot matrices have the exact same ordering of elements, then they must have the exact same global features. Now, related to that, if two dot matrices have different global features, right? Say that there was another image that was just like this, except there's only one bird, not two, all right? If another dot matrix has different global features than the first, then they can't possibly have the same what? So we're just talking about the parts versus the whole. And if there's like a difference at the holistic level between two dot matrices, then there has to also be a difference at what level? Tell me about that. And then we'll be able to advance this to the next stage. So difference at the global feature level would have to logically imply that there's also differences between the two structured matrices at the atomic level of dots. Exactly. Okay, so basically this is the deal. From the bottom up, if they're the same at the bottom base level, they're going to have the same global features. But if they're different at the global level, then they must have different atomic features too. Because again, if they did have the same atomic features, they couldn't differ in any way globally. So, you know, if you have, like, let's say one photo and another one that's been edited to have a different feature, like maybe, I don't know, it was photoshopped to remove like a blemish on a person's face, that second image can't possibly have the same pixel arrangement as the first because it has a different global feature there. Okay? Now, this is really just used as an analogy to the physical universe. So that's what we're building towards. The claim is that the universe that we're a part of is just like these dot matrices in a specific way. What do you think could be the surrogate for the dots of ink or pixels when we talk about the physical universe that we're a part of? So the claim is that we also are large-scale things made out of these little bits, but in the case of the physical universe, the bits are not pixels or dots of ink, but rather what? What would you say is the word there? The little element bits that form real objects in actual space and time. What would that be? Atoms, exactly, yeah. So basically atoms form the universe physically. And so what physicalism is saying, when it says that everything is physical, it's saying that every single thing in the universe is made out of atoms, just like these dot matrix pictures where every large-scale element of it is built out of the little atomic elements. And the claim is that since everything's made out of these atoms, everything that's at a larger level of description supervenes on the arrangement of underlying atoms. So just like when I told you, let's compare two different dot matrices and imagine that they have got the same exact ordering of elements, then they must have the same global features. Okay, now I really want you to think outside the box for a minute and try and process this thought. Suppose that there was another universe, okay? Has anyone ever heard of the concept of like multiple universes? Well, some people talk about that, and whether it's real or not, I just want you to speculate for a moment on the concept. So say that there was another whole universe, not talking about another planet, but another entire universe that was just like ours. But what I'm saying, it's just like ours in the sense that it has the same exact arrangement of atoms, okay? So if our universe, with its arrangement of atoms, produces me, you, World War II, the coronavirus, all the things that we see in reality, right? They're just the product of all the atoms at the atomic level being aggregated in the way that they are. So if there was another universe which had the exact same atomic facts, the same exact atom for atom duplication, then what would that other universe be like in comparison to ours? What do you think? The second universe, that's an atomic duplicate of our universe, would have to have what? Exactly the same, right, exactly the same global features. So in this duplicated universe that's atomically identical to ours, would there be a copy of you watching a copy of this lecture in that duplicated universe? Would you exist in the duplicate universe watching this lecture? I mean, a counterpart of you, I guess it wouldn't technically be identical to you because it'd be a different individual in a different universe, but yes, there'd be an exact duplicate of you having this experience, because what are you according to physicalism? You're just a congregation of atoms. And so by hypothesis, if there was an identical closed physical system with the same exact pattern and arrangement of atoms, then it would give rise to exactly the same events and objects, all the way down to and including your mental experiences. So the thoughts, feelings, pleasures, pains, and etc. that you go through in life, those would be reproduced also in the carbon copy universe, because all those things really are in the end is just a byproduct of the physical atoms arranged in the way that they are. So what it means to say that everything is physical is to say that everything supervenes in this universe on the atoms. And what that means, to be specific, is that if there were another possible world which was atomically identical to ours, then that other world would be exactly the same as ours in every other way as well. So there would still have been every event in history in that other universe because the atoms are the only thing that govern the playing out of events and even psychological events. So, I mean, that's really the supervenience concept that's important to understanding physicalism. To sort of make it really oversimplified, everything's made out of atoms, and so are you. And that's all there is to reality. So much so that if we could, by hypothesis, copy the atomic structure of our universe onto another one, like just kind of control paste the atomic structure to another physical system, the exact same events would be duplicated there. So what that implies, among other things, is that your consciousness is not something that's different from the physical. It's not like in this duplicate universe you could have different thoughts. Like your mind could be wandering off and thinking different things than what it's thinking here, because the mind, such as it is just the physical brain constituted atomically in the way that it happens to be at any given moment of time and space. So there's no room for consciousness to deviate from the results that we see in our universe if we had a physical system that was exactly the same. Okay, well, I'm going to summarize that again next Monday when we come back after the weekend, and we'll try our best to kind of finish up our philosophy of mind material either Monday or Wednesday next week. But thank you guys so much for your participation and everything. I really appreciate it. We had pretty good numbers today, up there around 15, so that's very good. Really appreciate you guys, and so good luck and have a great weekend. Stay safe and healthy, and I'll see you guys back. Okay, take care. Thank you. Bye-bye.